Good morning, everyone. How are you? Now, before we start, I think it would be helpful for your speakers in general just to quickly get to know you, especially nowadays, it's very hard to give a Zoom talk by staring at a wall. So you'll be doing your speaker great service just by showing your face sometime. That was for those. So Frank, thank you for showing your face. That's great. I get to see one face. That's good. Thank you. And Jimmy, I want to see yours too. Well, or you don't have to. But before we start, I'm just curious though, like what motivate people to come to this talk or attend this talk? Can anyone just give me a quick idea on what are you interested in? Feel free to talk, by the way. My in general, my talk's very free to talk. Anyone would like to share? How come you're here today? Connor, would you like to share?
Sure. I'm here. I'm just interested more generally in like Buddhism.
Okay.
I have some books, but I'm kind of looking for like a almost like a comprehensive education kind of.
Okay.
And of course, also I'm looking for like a kind of religious community and stuff and that type of environment as well.
Okay. So you're interested in Buddhism in general. That's good. That's good. Well, CMC definitely is one place to learn about Buddhism. That's great. Any other? Frank, you want to share?
Uh, well, I have been practicing Buddhism for years. Want to enhance myself. So especially in this Gilbert's talk of my work and trying to figure out a way of reducing wandering thought either during meditation or on the daily lives. That's the main goal.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Excellent. Great. Any other have something you'd like to share? Just want to get a quick idea on what people think this talk is about. I mean, in general. Any other? No? Julie? Julie's there? Okay. Well, if this is a college class, I'd be started calling every single person, but since this is a public talk, so I don't want to like get too harsh on people. Now, this talk, I name it Being, Knowing, and Doing. The reason why I started this title, I can start my talk by starting talk about the title of the talk. The purpose, let me just see, I can move my PowerPoint now. Okay. For those who don't know me, I grew up in Taiwan, and then I moved to this country at a relatively young age. And so I'm one, like many immigrants, I'm one of those immigrants who sort of have like one foot in two worlds, right? So in Taiwan, the way we do things and think about things is very different than in New York, for example. And I think if you're immigrants, if you speak bilingual, you would know that each language itself is almost like a world. So people who are bilingual are almost like living in two worlds. I wonder you ever had experience where you can express an idea in one way, but it's harder for you to express it in, let's say, in your native tongue or the vice versa. So like many immigrants, I have one foot in two worlds, and that kind of shaped my worldview, right? Because when you came to this country and you don't know much, what you usually do is you sort of try to compare and contrast what you know and what you don't know. And that's how I usually learn. So this kind of framework, right? This kind of framework, like comparing and contrasting, is sort of really color my experience. For example, very interested in martial arts. So when I learn martial arts, I get to learn different style of martial arts. And I also get to sort of compare and contrast. What is the similarity between this martial art and this martial art? Now, I don't know how many of you ever saw the movie The Grandmaster, but this is an excellent film. I highly recommend people to watch. In fact, the program I run the most at CMC in the past is actually Movie Zen. We basically watch film and we try to learn something from the film. There's one famous quote from this film I really like, and that is by the main actress, where she says, all the grand masters of the martial artist will go through 3 stages in life. And the American version of the Grandmaster, meaning when they translate, the American version is being, knowing, and doing. That's an interesting translation, because in the Chinese translate, if you like translated Chinese directly, the Grandmaster will go through 3 stages: seeing yourself, seeing the world, and seeing all living beings. So something for you to reflect and ponder about. What does that mean? What does it mean to be the Grandmaster? I mean, of course, in this film, it's about martial arts, but you can think about yourself. If you want to be good at something, let's say at your skill, at your career, do you believe that you should also go through these 3 stages, right? Including studying Dharma, right? If studying Dharma is something you want to pursue, right? Like when we study anything, do you think it's true that we will go through these 3 stages? So when I'm studying, so go back to One Foot in Two Worlds. When I'm studying martial arts, different martial arts, one commonality I will pay attention to is how this martial art would help me, my body shape, my body build, come versus another martial arts. So you would start to compare and contrast the styles. Now, not only, of course, not only martial arts, as a mental health professional, I'm very interested in distress. I mean, that's what we do, right? We're very interested in vexations or distress. We're interested in why people suffer. That's what psychologists are interested in. And of course, if you're interested in why people suffer, you will be encountering many different styles of theories. Just like martial arts, right? Think about it. Like martial arts, if your goal is to defeat the enemy, there are many different styles of martial arts. If you're interested in distress, there are many different styles of approach that one can deal with distress. So obviously, although psychotherapy is more like a Western product, of course, in Asia, in the Eastern tradition, we also have something that can deal with vexation or distress. So the spirit of this talk then is to really look for what is the common ingredient between Chinese approach, the Asian approach, especially the Zen approach, the Chinese Zen approach, versus the Western approach. And I really like, by the way, this is another movie. I highly recommend. This movie is called Zen. Literally, the name of the movie is called Zen. Excellent movie. And this is a movie about Dogen. And Dogen has a very famous quote. I think many of you heard of this before. You could take a look for a second. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things of the universe. To be enlightened by all things of the universe is to cast off the body and mind of the self as well as those of others. I wonder, do you start to see any similarity between Dogen's quote versus the last quote we saw at the Grandmaster? I personally like this quote very much because this quote points out the common ingredient of vexation. Like if you're interested in distress, no matter from the Western approach or the Eastern approach, one of the core ingredient of one's suffering, of one's distress, one of the important ingredient of your distress is really the self. So if you really are interested in dealing with your own distress, or even dealing with other people's distress, you should be very aware about the self. So to study the way, for those who are interested in Dharma, for those who are interested in Buddhism, if you're interested in Dharma, you should be interested in what the self is. What is the self? Who are you? This is very important because if you don't have this existential interest, it's hard to drive, to give your practice some energy, right? So I would say, and of course, Buddhism always talk about no self. But before you can talk about no self, you should know what the self is, because if you, I can tell, this is very much the same as telling a kid, you know, Santa Claus is not real. By the way, do you tell your kids that Santa Claus is not real? And you know, if a kid's really into Santa Claus, they'd be like, "You're lying. I have gifts every year. It's in the socks." You know, of course the gifts are there. So now you have to spend your time to explain to the kids why Santa Claus is not real. So to say there's no self is the same as saying there's no Santa Claus. But in order to say there's no self or no Santa Claus, you need to know what the Santa Claus is first, right? And then you start to point out, okay, the sock, the gift was from Walmart. You know, the wrapping paper was from here. The reindeer was from the TV. You know, and the story was fabricated. So self and no self, those are both are important to understand. I often joke my style of, so as a therapist, I often joke with my clients, my approach, my style of dealing with distress is really a fusion food style. And I don't know how many people like fusion foods. Fusion foods is like one of those things, you know, like either you really like it or you don't like it. General Tso's chicken is sort of like fusion foods. I mean, like when you go back to Taiwan, there's no General Tso, but General Tso is like American foods, right? Another example of fusion foods is like cronuts, donut plus croissant. For those who heard of it, it's really popular. Every day there's people line up for cronuts. I had my first cronut during the pandemic because there's no line, so I rushed in. I get my first cronuts, and it tastes like crap, basically. So my point is, my style of talk gonna be sort of like a fusion style. So for those who are very into Buddhism, you may like it, and for those who for those who are very into psychotherapy, you may not like it because I sort of mix everything together. But the common ingredient is the self. So this is where the spirit of this talk coming from. Of course, if you are in Dharma Drum long enough, then you will realize our teacher, Master Shin Yin, have already said something similar. This is Sifu's very famous quote. Face it, accept it, deal with it, and let it go. Of course, this it could be many things, but one of the most important it is really the self. So it's really facing the self, accepting the self, dealing with the self, and let go of the self. So I think the spirit of our topic for today and next week, and maybe even in the future, I think I'm probably going to use the same title from now on, since all my talks are about the same thing. It's all about the self. And you already have so many Buddhist teachers at Dhamma telling you about no self. So you got to have one person to tell you about the self. So that person will be me. So all my talks are all going to be about the self. I'm going to talk about the self inside out, left and right, just in case you get bored about, the self, right? So this is sort of where the spirit of the talk coming from: self-affirmation, self-transformation, and self-dissolution. So the key thing about the self is really to answer the question, who am I? And in Western psychology, there are many different disciplines. There are different disciplines in Western psychology. Like there are sub-disciplines like neuropsychology, experimental psychology, social psychology. The psychology that really try to deal with this question, the question of who am I, is personality psychology, the psychology of personality. And this is one of the most important course, or one of the important subject that all psychologists or therapists especially need to have a good grasp of. Because if you want to deal with people's distress, you need to answer, or at least you need to be interested in this question: who am I? How you think about who you are is important, because that's also how you see other people, right? How you see other people and how you see yourself, they are intertwined. We all, and so homework for you today is really think about this, right? How do I see myself and how do I see others? Very important question. So personality. Before I move on, let's just get a few quick feedback. What do you think personality is? Any volunteers? What do you think a personality is? Here's one, or here's an example. Do you think a dog has personality?
I would say yes, because the way I see it, personality is just a set of basal, I would say personality is a mixture between basal, like, I guess you could say like immutable traits that just come from like genetics, and then acquired traits that are perhaps the expression of those genetics. So for example, like to my left over there, I've got like a pet lizard who lives in like that big plastic tub. It's not visible on camera, but he has a personality that differs from other members of his species. And right next to him, I've got a snake, and she lives in her own big plastic tub, and she's very different from other snakes in terms of her personality. And both of them even have like a mood. So
Really?
I'd say, yeah. So I'd say even like an animal could have like a personality.
Wow, I didn't know snake has personality, because I thought Monday they look the same, Tuesday they look the same, Wednesday
that's usually what she's like, but it's slow. So it's like 1 week she's like this, then the next week she's like that. Right now she's kind of grumpy, but
Grumpy Moo? Wow, interesting. And I'm sure dog owners, I mean, dog is the most obvious one, but I never heard of snake. That's a good, interesting, cool idea. So snakes has personality. Cool. How about car? Do you think car has personality?
Oh, that's kind of difficult. I would say that people ascribe to a car or to any inanimate object or idea a personality, but that's sort of, I would say, not the same type of personality that a person or an animal has, but more of either an aesthetic style or some type of, I guess you could say, like spirit of that idea.
Right, like a Honda Civic and a Jeep. They feels different, right? I mean, it feels almost like two different personality, right? Interesting, right? Now, and if you start to think about this personality, it's interesting, right? Like if you believe there's a soul, if people believe there's a soul for your Christian friends, or people believe in reincarnation, do our personality go along with it? Do our personality go to heaven, or do our personality reincarnate?
I would may.
Interesting question, right?
Oh, do you want me to respond to that, or?
No, or anyone, like, you know.
I would say.
Would you want to try? The Mana?
I don't know. I mean, I think the question is like, do our thoughts die with us? And I don't know.
It's interesting, right? If you believe there's, let's say, if our personality do not reincarnate with us, then what is reincarnating? Because you are the personality, right? If you think about it, that's what you are, right? You are the personality. So if you're gonna go to heaven without your personality, if you're Christian, then who are you? Right. Same thing with reincarnate. Same thing is with reincarnation, right? If you like reincarnating, and there's no personality, so what is exactly reincarnating? Yeah, Connor.
I would maybe posit that our personality is even if we don't reincarnate with our exact personality or our memories, perhaps that's not really, I guess you could say, what we are. Like maybe we're more than the because I think maybe this is something that's endemic, maybe in like Western thought, that people are the sum of their memories and like personality traits essentially. But if it's that maybe the kernel of that, like, well, the way I've always this is not taught to me in Buddhism, but I used to go to this Taoist temple and meditate and do stuff there years ago on like the other side of the country, and I was taught that it was possible for a person who had a high enough level of spiritual cultivation that they would eventually be able to to like know what their past lives were. So I assume it's somewhere, but on a very large external hard disk, so to speak.
Very interesting, huh?
However, I would anyways, I digress. Like I would say that the kind of nucleus of like a personhood is not actually like the personality or the kind of persona, but more like the I don't know how to put this, like almost like a there's almost like I think a metaphysical like kernel in like a person, which is like that consciousness, that like existence, so to speak.
I think you hit the key word here. I think we all deep down believe there is something solid within us that's not changing. Right? That's like almost like a cognitive default, that there's something within us that's not changing, even though we're changing all the time, right? So something for you to think about. Now, this question is very interesting. I really want people to spend a good chunk of time think about it. In fact, I think all my lectures in general are somewhat related to this question, who am I? Even my personal kongan or my personal Watto practices, I mean, Watto itself is related to this question, really, right? This existential question. Who am I and what am I? Right. So just go through some basics. In personality, the word persona is like the Greek roots of this word is like a mask. Because the mask, the actor wore in the ancient Greek plays. Like in the ancient time, one actor would play like several different roles. So when they play one role, they would put a different mask on. So the word persona itself, personality, came from the word persona, which is mask. So that's interesting, right? It seems like personality is something to do with the mask. The way it's almost like we have different masks. Like you can think about that for a second. Are you always the same? Or you're kind of different person with different people, right? And I think the more you start to think about this question, the more you're going to realize it's actually not easy to define. It's not easy to explain. In fact, we can never really know other people's personality fully. The only personality you really know is yourself, if you think about it. I mean, that's your best data. After all, is like that the one that you know the most is really your own personality. Of course, we can come up ways to study others, but the only way you can really fully understand what personality is through yourself. And the more you start to delve into personality psychology, you will realize that every theorist, every personality theorist have a different way of thinking about the term personality. Everyone have a different ideas of what it is, okay? So when we talk about personality theory, it's important also to define what theory is. Right. Theory, if you look at, again, the roots of this word, it's really the act of viewing, the act of contemplating, or the way we think about something, right? And theory is man-made. It's not like something that's always there. Theory is really a set of abstract ideas that we develop about a group of facts. Another way to understand what a theory is really the best explanation we have about something. That's what a theory is. The best explanation about something. So hundreds of years ago, the best explanation for the shape of Earth is that the Earth is flat. That was the best explanation we have. However, as new information and data comes in, we want to change our theory to explain more. So now our newer theory is that Earth is round. Of course, you still have a bunch of people believe the Earth is flat, which is okay. We are free to believe whatever we want. But you need to know a theory is just a theory. A theory is only useful when it's applicable, right? So what's the best thing about a theory? A theory helps you to predict. So that's what personality theory does, right? That's what it do for us. It helps us to predict. If you make friends, I think you may want to know your friend's personality. And even if you own a pet, you may want to know your pet's personality so you can predict. Right? You can predict. So although I'm talking about personality theory as if it's an academic discipline, I think intuitively we all have theories about what people are and how people act. So that's another question you can again contemplate about. How do you see people? how do you see people act? What do you think people are? Are they, do we all born to be good? You know, like that's like a common Chinese thing, right? Everyone was born like a blank slate. We all like pure and happy people until we meet something bad happen to us. Some people believe that all men are evil. Right? We all have our theories on what people are. So theories, again, are not given by nature. They are man-made. So here are just some of the examples of different kinds of personality theory. One of the earliest personality theories is really by Freud. And Freud's approach, I mean, nowadays, if you look at Freud's theory, a lot of, he may get a whole bunch of stuff wrong, but you need to know that Freud can only come up with a theory of his time. So he developed his theory based on what was known during his time. And Freud, of course, has some really excellent students, Carl Jung and Adler. So those are like the big three in psychology history. These are just some of the basic. And then you also have Adler and, I mean, Fromm, Karen Horney, Freud, Anna Freud, Erikson. All these approaches have something in common. The psychoanalytic approach, the biggest discovery they always promote or they talk about is really the discovery of unconscious. So all of them have something in common, which is that people are not very aware. People are not very aware of their motives, their drives. In other words, people are mostly unaware of what's going on in their head. And I think if you meditate, you would know most of the time we are drowning in our wandering thoughts. We're literally drowning in our wandering thoughts all the time without even knowing that we're drowning. So this is one approach of personality theory. And of course, later on, I mean, in the future lectures, I may start to go over some of these theories. But for now, I'm just giving you some basic ideas. Then later on, you also have experimentalists. The most famous ones probably Skinner and Bandura. Theorists like Skinner, they don't believe in personality. He doesn't even think that's an interesting construct. Because what Skinner believes is that what makes you are made up by behaviors, and your behaviors are mainly really, most of the time, are really not in your control as much as you think you want to have. If any of you had like basic psychology classes, you will learn about things like Pavlov's dog, right? A lot of our behavior and action are reinforced or conditioned. Condition means like habitual. You don't even know you have the habit until people point it out. And you can change that habit by just changing the environment without you making the change. So to Skinner, the so-called self are made up by a bunch of things, and a lot of things are really influenced by the environment. So the self to Skinner is not a very useful concept, personality at least. Then we have the trait theorist. So earlier we were talking about traits, and that's one common belief people have about personality is they are traits. So what are traits? Traits here, this is another example. Traits are something that is concrete, that's describable, that's measurable within us. So if you think about how we describe people, this person is smart, this person is funny, he's an angry person. All right, if you think about how we think about people, we have many different labels. We have many different labels for people. However, do you think there are some common factor that can sort of describe all those different labels? So for example, personality, for example, Cattell. What Cattell did was that they basically took out a dictionary and take out all the words that can be used to describe a person, right? Moody, happy, sad, depressed. And you can imagine that that's a lot of words, right? If you take out a bunch of words, thousands of words. And what Cattell did was they actually make good use of statistics. And in statistics, there is something called factor analysis. And what you do is you basically analyze, is there any common factor that can be used to describe all those thousands of terms? Think of an alien that come to Earth. Let's say the alien is interested in music. And so when the alien hear music, they start to describe music. Oh, this is music. Music has beats. Oh, music has rhythm. Oh, some music have words, lyrics. Oh, some music have this kind of tempo. So you can also come up thousands of words to describe music. However, if you do a statistical analysis of music, you can also find underlying factors. And what are those underlying factors? Those are what? Genres, right? Genres. Classical music versus heavy metal versus pop or rap. So same thing with personality. You take out thousands of words that can be used to describe people, and you run the statistics, and you see, is there common ingredients that's shared by everyone? So trait theorists are really like the scientists here. They use very systematic way to study people. And Cattell came up 16 factors. 16. Like, you can basically describe each person with those 16 factors. Later on, people felt like 16 are still too many. So you can break down to 5. We call those the big 5. And Eisen thinks 5 is still too many, and he broke down to 3. But I mean, that's just too little. So what are the 5? The big 5 as an example. There are 5 key traits that can be used to describe every single person. That's what's called a big 5. So for some of us, we tend to be very open-minded, for example. And for some of us, we tend not to be so open-minded. It could be as simple as going to a restaurant. Some people will try new dishes, and some people will try old dishes every time, right? I mean, So some of us are more open to new ideas, and some of us are not so open to new ideas. And that's one key trait that can be used to describe everyone. We call that openness, for example. Now, of course, there are other traits, but you get the idea. And then other theory that's also interesting are what's called a humanistic and existential theories. Humanism, for example, like Maslow and Rogers, has sort of an Asian view. They feel that human has potentials, like we can all be the best we can be. So our personality is really a reflection of how we are pursuing to be the best. The existential approach, these are theories influenced by existential philosophers, people like Rollo May or Yalom. They are interested in how people confront life and how life shapes our personality. So as an example, as long as you are a human being, you will have difficulties that's shared by everyone. There are certain existential challenges no one can escape from. For example, one of the challenges that's shared by all of us is the concept of death and dying. No matter who you are, no matter how successful, how happy, how great, sooner or later, 100 years from now, we're all not going to be here. You may, well, actually, not. Maybe some of you may live over 100 years, but majority of us will not be here. Now, human is really a unique animal if you think about it, because we have the mental capacity to foresee the future, where majority of the animal does not have that ability, and that's a gift. We can foresee the future, so we can problem solve. But there's one problem that's hard to solve, and that's the problem of death and dying. You will die. Me, I will die. You will die. We all will die. So what does that mean to you? And how are you going to solve that problem? And that's what existential therapists are interested in, existential theorists. How we confront, how we deal, how we face existential issues will also shape who we are as a person. This is my personally, these are like my favorite theories, because I found Buddhism and Zen have a lot of existential taste to it as well. And of course, later on, we have cognitive theories. These are the theorists who focus a lot on our belief system. Who we are has a lot to do with the way we think, how we think. So the cognitive theorists are interested in how we learn, how our belief system is built up. For example, someone who has a depressed personality, they tend to view the world in a very narrow way, which is the future is hopeless, the world is dangerous, and I'm worthless. Right? That's a pretty fundamental set belief system they have. So the cognitive theorists are interested in identifying your belief system, as well as coming up strategies of modifying your belief system. So far, these are all personality theories from the West. Of course, the non-Western approach would be more related to us, is Buddhism. That would be a classic example of non-Western approach. Buddhism also have a theory of the self. We also have a lot of description of what self is and what self is not. So if you want to be a helper to help someone's distress, or if you want to deal with your own distress, one key entry point is really the door of the self. So when we learn about Zen, when we learn about Buddhism, I mean, this is another example I like to use all the time. We need to realize or let go of our self-referential perspectives, or in order to see the no self. I just came from a basketball game, so I'm going to use basketball as an example. Talking about no self is like using basketball as an analogy. The practicing of no self is the practicing of like putting a basketball into the hoop, right? The idea is straightforward, but it's not easy, because knowing to put the ball in the hoop and actually doing it is two different things. In fact, it's important to talk about the self, because the hoop is the self, right? You need to know where the hoop is first before you can put the ball in the hoop. So I would use that to talk about why personality theories are very important. Traditionally, the way, and this is really the Western psychology, but you could also try to apply it to the Asian approach if you want. Traditionally, the way we study personality has two ways: the clinical way and the academic way. The academic way tend to be relying heavily on scientific method. I think it's very important to learn about scientific method, especially for our new generations, because scientific method is not a method, but it's a way of thinking. It's really critical thinking. That's what scientific method is. A way of thinking that is characterized by being very curious, yet critical, but also humble. Like if you're wrong, you're willing to accept that you're wrong. That's scientific thinking. Right? So the academic psychology, the trait theorists would be an example of academic psychology. They use a lot of different tools to measure personality. The clinical approach, I think Zen may be more following this part. It's really like a systematic way. It's also systematic, but it's more dealing with real people and dealing with real people's problems. So Freud would be a sort of like an example. He would spend a good chunk of time just studying one person. Case study, for example. One good thing about being a psychologist is that you get to learn about a person inside out as much as possible, where you don't normally learn about people in your normal social settings. So, I mean, normally we all very put together when we just see each other, hang out together. But when people talk about what's inside their mind, there is a whole different world. That's all I can say, right? There is the self that everyone knows, and there's the self that only your Google knows, right? Just look at what you Google, that would tell about who you are more than your friends know about you. So that would be sort of a more clinical way of knowing yourself. So traditionally, we have these two approaches of learning about personality. And because, as I mentioned earlier, there are many different ways to know about oneself. So there are many different theories that people have, not just the academic theory, but your own personal theory. Think about it. You also have your own personal theory about what people are and why people act the way they act. So in general, it's good to know that there are different kinds of ways to know people, or there are different perspectives. There are basically three categories. There are like three ways that we get to know people. The philosophical way, the scientific way, and the artistic way. And again, this could be applicable to yourself too. The philosophical way, the scientific way, and the artistic way. The philosophical way means that we all have some philosophical assumption about what does it mean to be a person. The scientific way means that we tend to collect data in our daily life, and we try to make sense of the data as non-judgmental as possible. Artistic way means that we tend to have a view of what a person is, and we apply it on ourselves and on others. So here is an example of the philosophical assumption that you can think about. And these are some good questions you can ask yourself. For example, do you believe yourself? I mean, using yourself then. Do you believe that people have control? Or do you believe yourself have control of your own behaviors? And you understand the motives behind it? Or you believe that the reason why you do certain things is really not under your control, but is really motivated by your inner drive that you're not aware of, or by external factors that you're conditioned to, right? So this is something you can think about, right? Are you more on this end or on this end? Another example, let me just give you another example. Do you believe that each of us are unique and we cannot be compared to others? Or you believe that people are basically very similar in nature in some way, right? I mean, so using Zen as an example, we all believe that people have Buddha nature. That would be on this domain, right? However, just because we all have Buddha nature, does that mean we're the same, or we can be unique, right? We're unique because of Buddha nature, right? So how you think about these are all some good philosophical assumptions you can use to think about yourself. Do you believe that we initiate, or do you believe that we tend to react to what the world asks us to do, right? And do you believe that personality can be changed? If you have a depressive personality, do you think that can be changed? So some of us believe that we are always going to be the same. Some of us believe that there's something that's changeable. So these are some good questions you can really use to ask about yourself. How do I view myself? Relate to these philosophical assumptions. The scientific approach is about data approach. So before I was using the Big Five as an example, but here is an example about critical thinking. Critical thinking is very important. We need to collect data. We need to collect information to see how the data are correlated. And we need to test out why certain data relate to another data. If you're able to connect the dots, then you have insights. If you can see the big picture of why the data express itself, we call that wisdom. And if you just join random points based on data, we call that conspiracy theory. Okay, so data is important, and that's another way we learn about self. So the way we learn about people is also based on data, but you have to reflect on the data and the connection you make with your data. Very important. Last example is really how a personality theory can be used. The most common example of how personality theory is used, as I mentioned earlier, is really psychotherapy. And what's psychotherapy? I mean, that's another topic itself, but here are just some examples of what psychotherapy is for. Usually people only know about the most popular purpose of psychotherapy, of course, is to deal with distress. However, when we make a survey and we ask psychologists, what's the main reason for people to go to psychotherapy? The most important reason for psychologists in general is insight about who you are as a person. So I think I'm running out of time. I'm just going to open up for some question, Q&A. Thank you. Any question for me?
Feel free to use the.
Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, Peter, thank you very much for the talk. I'm just wondering, is this the time going to have your talk the series of self and no self, or because I'm not aware of the series of talk for this topic, and it's kind of the first session. Can you share your plan?
Huh? Sorry.
Can you share your talk plan for? Is this a series of talks, and then what time are the talks going to be?
Oh, yes. So next week will be the continuation of this week's talk. Same time.
Same time. Okay.
Same time. Then I don't know what's the third one and fourth one, but but I would just continue the same topic, keep going. Of course, I will always review it before we start, so people get an idea. But this is really a very broad overview so far on why it's important to talk about the self. And later on, when we get into more detail, then, hopefully it will be more interesting. But I think the spirit, the key point, the key takeaway for you today is really, you should be interested in this question, the question of who am I? I think that's my purpose today, is just want you to think about this question. Now, what is personality? For Buddhists, non-Buddhists, this is a good question to ask. Like, what is the self? Right. Before you jump to no self, what is the self? Good. Any other question? I think this is gonna be the only talk from CMC that someone's gonna talk about self every other minute. So it's gonna be a lot of self. And you're gonna learn that self is illusory in general, but yeah, why is it illusory? Make sense? Any other? All right, I guess if there's no more question, hopefully I get to see you next week. If you like. Yeah. Great.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Lin, for an interesting talk. The Chan Meditation Center welcomes and invites you to write down your reflection on today's discussion and submit them to start a dialogue. You can submit them via email to chancenter@gmail.com. Again, that's CHANCENTER@gmail.com. Join us again next week for part 2 of Dr. Lin's talk.
Yeah. So by the way, I would recommend in general, because the lecture is dead. what makes a lecture interesting is when there's a live discussion. So feel free to make it alive, because I think I'm only one person. I can only have so much. I only have so much knowledge, but I think we all have our own perspective that we all don't know about. So that's what make a live discussion wise and interesting. So feel free to chip in next week.